In this video, we uncover a calculated double execution that began as nothing more than a routine drive across the Irish border. On the night of March 7, 2012, two young men from Dublin, Anthony Burnett and Joseph Redmond, set off in a stolen Volkswagen Golf, planning to sell it in Newry for €700. One told his family he trusted the buyer. The other admitted he feared it might be a trap. Hours later, at 10:51 p.m, emergency services were called to Ravensdale Forest Park in County Louth. Firefighters arrived to find a black Golf engulfed in flames in a secluded lay-by. When the blaze was finally extinguished, the truth emerged. Inside the front seats were two bodies, charred, slumped together and barely identifiable. Both men had been shot in the head before the car was set alight. What unfolded that night wasn't a deal gone wrong. It was a planned, efficient execution carried out with chilling precision. This is the story of two friends from Ballybough who thought they were making a quick sale, and the ruthless ambush that ended their lives. Anthony Burnett was 31 years old. Joseph Redmond, known as Joey, was 25. Both were from Ballybough, a working-class area of Dublin's north inner city. They had known each other since childhood, but had only recently begun spending time together about a week before their deaths. To understand how these two men ended up shot and burned in a stolen car on a quiet country road, one must first understand the lives they led and the choices that brought them to that meeting. Burnett was the more serious offender. His criminal record included scores of convictions, robberies, muggings, assaults. His path into crime began disturbingly early. He tried cannabis while still in primary school. By the age of 13, he was already using heroin. His addiction consumed him. At one point, after receiving an accident compensation payout, Burnett spent £20,000 on heroin in a single month. His criminal activity escalated. He served 3 years in prison for an attack on a Slovakian man. But in the months before his death, those who knew him said he had been trying to change. The court would later hear that Burnett had gotten off drugs, was mixing with different people, and had even bought an apartment in Turkey, a symbol perhaps of a life he hoped to build away from Dublin streets. But change is difficult, especially when old habits and financial pressures resurface. His birthday was approaching. He was frustrated, fed up with having no money. That frustration, combined with opportunity, would set the events of March 7th in motion. Joseph Redmond's criminal history was less violent, but no less entrenched. He had accumulated between 50 and 60 convictions, mostly for minor theft and acquisitive crimes, stealing kegs of beer from pubs, opportunistic burglaries, the kind of offences driven by necessity and desperation rather than organised ambition. But Redmond was also vulnerable in ways that extended beyond his criminal record. Garda Síochána, the Irish police, had warned him that his life was under threat. The nature of that threat was never fully specified in court, but it hung over him in the days before his death, a shadow of danger he could not escape. On March 7, 2012, Burnett and Redmond made a decision that would cost them their lives. They stole a car and arranged to sell it across the border in Northern Ireland. The buyer waiting in Newry was Jason O'Driscoll, a man whose involvement in the events of that night would become the focus of a years-long investigation and trial. O'Driscoll lived in Newry, just north of the border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. He had agreed to purchase the stolen Volkswagen Golf for €700, a modest sum for a vehicle, but enough to make the trip seem worthwhile to Burnett and Redmond. What neither man could have known, or perhaps what one of them suspected, was that the meeting had never been about buying a car. The Volkswagen Golf had been stolen earlier on March 7th in a brazen daylight theft at an elderly couple's home in Ballybough. Redmond forced his hand through a letterbox, reached inside, and opened the door. He took the keys and drove away with the car. For the rest of the day, Burnett and Redmond attempted to sell the vehicle. Burnett even approached a law-abiding friend of his, trying to offload the stolen Golf. However, the friend refused. By evening, the only buyer who had expressed interest was Jason O'Driscoll in Newry, who had agreed to pay €700 if they would deliver the car to him. It was not a sophisticated criminal operation. It was opportunistic, desperate, and for Burnett at least, motivated by immediate financial pressure. His birthday was coming, and he had no money. The stolen car represented a quick solution to both problems. Before they left Dublin, Burnett spoke to his sister. He told her he trusted the person he was going to meet. It was a statement that, in hindsight, would carry unbearable weight. But Redmond was less confident. His sister overheard Burnett expressing concern that they might be walking into a trap. It was a moment of prescience, a flicker of awareness that something about the arrangement felt wrong. Despite that unease, both men got into the stolen Golf and drove north. They crossed the border into Northern Ireland, heading toward Newry and the meeting that had been arranged. They believed they were going to make a sale. They were, in fact, driving toward an execution. The precise location and timing of the murders remain partially reconstructed through forensic evidence, witness testimony, and CCTV footage. What is certain is that Burnett and Redmond never completed the sale of the Volkswagen Golf. At some point after arriving in the Newry area, both men were shot in the head at close range. The killings were execution-style, deliberate, professional, and carried out with no apparent struggle. Forensic examination would later confirm that both victims had been shot before the car was set ablaze, meaning they were already dead when the fire began. The bodies were left in the front seats of the Golf, slumped over each other in a grotesque tableau. The car was then driven to a remote lay-by in Ravensdale Forest Park, just south of the border in County Louth. There, it was doused in accelerant and set alight. At 10:51 p.m., emergency services received a call reporting a vehicle fire in the forest. Firefighters arrived to find the black Volkswagen Golf fully engulfed in flames. As they worked to extinguish the blaze, they saw shapes inside the vehicle, human forms, blackened and distorted by the heat. One firefighter would later testify to the horror of what he saw: skulls and rib cages visible through the flames. When the fire was finally brought under control, the full extent of the carnage became clear. Two bodies, fused together by the intense heat, sat slumped in the front seats. The smell of burned flesh and melted upholstery filled the air. Forensic investigators worked through the night to recover and identify the remains. Dental records and other identifying features were used to confirm what investigators already suspected. The victims were Burnett and Redmond. Both had been shot in the head. Both had been left to burn. And somewhere, the killers had already fled the scene. While firefighters worked to extinguish the blaze at Ravensdale Forest, another sequence of events was unfolding just north of the border. PSNI officers, the police service of Northern Ireland, observed a Southern-registered Mercedes S-Class entering Newry. When they attempted to stop the vehicle, the driver accelerated, triggering a high-speed chase through the town. The Mercedes sped through streets, ignoring signals to pull over, before disappearing into the night. Minutes later, CCTV cameras captured footage of two men entering an off-license in May, a small village just north of the border. The timestamp, approximately 11:10 p.m., less than 20 minutes after the burning Golf had been discovered. The state would later argue that one of the men seen on that footage was Jason O'Driscoll. The following morning, the stolen Mercedes S-Class was found abandoned near May. Its false number plates had been removed. A crime scene investigator who examined the vehicle noted a strong smell of cleaning fluid. The car had been wiped down. An attempt to remove fingerprints, DNA, or any other trace evidence that might link its occupants to the murders. The investigation into the murders of Anthony Burnett and Joseph Redmond became a cross-border operation, involving both the Garda Síochána in the Republic of Ireland and the PSNI in Northern Ireland. The case would rely not on a single smoking gun, but on a web of circumstantial evidence that, piece by piece, pointed toward O'Driscoll. Phone records and CCTV footage became central to the prosecution's case. CCTV cameras captured O'Driscoll and a second man topping up mobile phones that were in contact with the victims on the night of the murders. Additional footage showed O'Driscoll in a hotel where a payphone appeared in the victims' call records, suggesting he had been coordinating the meeting using multiple methods to avoid direct traceability. The Mercedes S-Class was traced through CCTV and witness testimony. The vehicle seen speeding away from police in Newry was later confirmed to be the same car found abandoned near May, wiped clean of evidence. While no direct forensic link placed O'Driscoll inside the Mercedes, the circumstantial connections, his presence in the area, the phone records, the CCTV sightings, formed a pattern. Eyewitness descriptions from the PSNI officers involved in the chase were used to create composite images of the Mercedes' occupants. The prosecution argued that one composite matched an associate of O'Driscoll's, further tightening the net. The state's case was built on convergence. No single piece of evidence was definitive, but together they formed a narrative. O'Driscoll had arranged the meeting, he had been in the area, he had access to the getaway vehicle, and the victims, lured north under the pretense of a sale, had been executed and burned. Jason O'Driscoll was charged with 2 counts of murder. The prosecution's theory was straightforward. O'Driscoll and at least one accomplice had lured Burnett and Redmond north with the promise of buying the stolen Golf. Once the victims arrived, they were shot, the car was set on fire, and the killers fled in the stolen Mercedes. The motive, as presented by the state, was transactional and opportunistic. O'Driscoll would obtain a stolen car without paying for it, and the sellers, potential witnesses who could later identify him, would be eliminated. It was cold, calculated, and brutally efficient. The defense contested every element of the prosecution's case. O'Driscoll pleaded not guilty. In court, wearing a grey 3-piece suit, he stood and declared, "I'm innocent, Your Honor. I'm innocent. Not guilty." His legal team argued that the evidence was entirely circumstantial. There was no forensic proof placing O'Driscoll in the Golf or the Mercedes. There were no witnesses to the actual shootings. The CCTV footage was ambiguous. The phone records, while suspicious, did not conclusively prove involvement in murder. The defense suggested alternative possibilities, another perpetrator entirely, or even a betrayal between the victims themselves. Though this theory was speculative and unsupported by evidence, the case went to trial. And when it concluded, a retrial was ordered. In August 2018, a jury returned a majority verdict, guilty 10-2. On October 2, 2018, Justice Michael White sentenced O'Driscoll to life imprisonment for the murders of Anthony Burnett and Joseph Redmond. The murders left devastation in their wake. Burnett's mother spoke of the impossibility of an open casket funeral. Her son's body had been so badly burned that she could not see his face at least one last time. She described her heart as shattered, a word that barely captures the depth of a mother's grief. Redmond's mother said her son had been killed for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was a simple, heartbreaking truth. Redmond had been warned his life was in danger. He had a history of minor crime, but nothing that warranted execution. He had been pulled into a situation not of his making, and it had cost him everything. The brutal nature of the crime, the execution-style shootings, the burning of the bodies left a deep impression on investigators, jurors, and the wider community. This was not a crime of passion. It was premeditated, methodical, and merciless. Nearly 12 years have passed since Anthony Burnett and Joseph Redmond drove north across the Irish border with a stolen Volkswagen Golf, believing they were going to make a quick sale. €700 in cash, enough to solve immediate problems and move on with their lives. Instead, they were shot dead, left to burn in a remote forest, and reduced to charred remains that could only be identified through forensic analysis. Jason O'Driscoll is serving a life sentence for their murders. The second occupant of the Mercedes S-Class was never identified or charged. The full truth of what happened that night Who planned it? Who pulled the trigger? Whether there were others involved remains known only to those who were there.